Hey, it's Eugene here, and welcome to episode 38 of Give Yourself Some Leeway, the podcast dedicated to helping high achievers on the verge of burnout reclaim a healthier work life balance without sacrificing their growth or success. Today, I am delighted to introduce you to Bob Cotton. With over 20 years' experience in the tech industry. I mean, before this episode, I had very limited knowledge about what happened in the tech industry. Yes, I know how burnout can affect people in the food industry and in healthcare, but Bob gives me such great insight into the factors that affect people in the tech industry when it comes to burnout prevention, and recovery. And he also covers the element of how his burnout recovery journey started about 20 years ago, yet he still had some setbacks 15 to 20 years later. And it's not a matter of just recovering from burnout once in your life and hey, that's it. Burnout can happen, the cycle can start again in different areas when different stressors come into play, and it's about having the right tools in your toolbox so that you can address it in certain scenarios. If you enjoyed today's episode, please reach out to me at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com, on Instagram at eugene.leeway, or shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode with Bob Cotton, and let me know what you think. Bob, one of the things that I always like to start with coaches is that there's this specific breaking point or rock bottom that we all seem to face. And from that stems a journey of self-recovery, self-development, and somewhere along the line, we get a spark or a vision that leads us to coaching. So what was that like for you, and why do you do what you do?
Yeah, so I lived in America. I worked on a program in America. I was running a program. I was also running a consulting business at the same time, all for the same employer, working with a client, and it was 6, 7 days a week type thing. It was all uncharted territory, super stressful. Great people, working with great people, great atmosphere, a lot of energy, but it was a slog. It was hard. And then there's the business side, which was being driven from the UK. So I was kind of on my own with that in America. And after a while, I kind of feel the walls just closing in, physically tired, mentally. It's a struggle to get up and get into it every day. Keep on going, keep on going. And then I remember I flew back to the UK, spent some time with my parents, and I just kind of lay in the back garden staring at the sky. It was August, it was blue sky, so a rare day in England. And I just stared at the sky and just went, I can't do this anymore. And then it was like, well, what am I going to do to change it? And then that was my turning point. And then from there, it was a process of how do I make changes and what are the things I'm going to stop doing fundamentally. And that was the turning point for me. And then I think from that there was a realization that in order to stop doing things without the world crashing apart and making it even worse for me, I had to encourage and coach other people to do things. And so that's probably where it all stemmed from. And that's nearly over 20 years ago now. But then along the way, as my own career and life journey continued, there were again versions of that moment where I'd been doing certain things for certain periods of time and it worked fine, but then new things would come on board. And there was this constant rebalancing or this checking, this need to rebalance. And that's kind of reinvigorated me along the way. And after a while, I kind of recognized that actually from feedback I had, from the results I got, that actually I'm good at coaching people. I enjoy coaching people. I enjoy helping people achieve their potential. And so that was something I embedded into my corporate life and my corporate style. And then leaving corporate life in August 21, I thought that's a pathway I want to pursue.
I think one thing that you did cover there, especially when you said that day in August, that very rare day in August you had, that your turning point was you setting a boundary.
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually, it was a recognition. Yeah, there was a realization that in that moment of calmness of lying in that back garden in Norfolk, thousands of miles away from everything, looking at the sky and just this big blue sky, just thinking, this is a moment of stillness. And I have not had this calm and stillness for such a long time. And that from that was then, okay, I need to not go back to what I was doing. And therefore I need to set some boundaries and hence and go from there. Yeah. But I think the thing that came first was that moment of stillness and that moment of clarity. And then it was, oh, how am I going to act? And how do I preserve this memory? Which, of course, as I said, it's over 20 years ago now, but I could describe that scene to you vividly. I won't bore you with it, but you know.
It was that moment of awareness.
Yeah.
I think that's where everything it always stems back to, is once you have awareness that there's the issue there. Some people literally go in circles. They stay in the burnout cycle and they burn out. They take a step back. They recharge the batteries a little bit,
Yeah.
and then just restart the cycle. But it's when you get to that moment of realization,
Yes.
and awareness of your situation,
yes,
and then you can take action. I think for a lot of people, it's trying to get them to that place of awareness so that they can take action, so that they realize, that they know that they can move on from this, that they can recover rather than just constantly recharging the batteries.
Yeah. I feel in my mind, I feel it's a bit like it's a bit like a road network, and people just keep going down the same roads over and over again, and it's just getting them to stop at a crossroads and go, actually, you know, there's other ways you can go, and just that realization that there are other ways, that just that alone moves people forward. So that was it for me. That was how I got into that. And then I think the other part of your question was about what I'm doing today, if I remember rightly.
When it comes to tech, are there any specific, because I have no experience in tech, my background has always been in the food industry.
Yeah.
So are there any areas of tech, let's say, that are particularly stressful or may lead to burnout? When it comes to the likes of healthcare, it's usually the long shifts. People are working double shifts, they're working night shifts. And same in hospitality, it's the same. It's working long shifts, working night shifts, working irregular hours that leads to that burnout. So is there a similar kind of expectation in the tech industry?
Yeah, so I mean, my career was tech and consulting, delivering projects. So there's deadlines, like I was talking about, and then running a technology business, either a consulting business or a software businesses. And so you get deadlines of all different kinds in there. The ones that start to drive burnout are the project ones, where people come together for a short period, an intense period of time to deliver some kind of outcome. And there are usually an awful lot of stakeholders who've invested either their money or their time or their reputation in seeing that outcome happen. And so a lot of pressure is put onto the team to deliver. And that's where burnout can come in, and it manifests itself though in slightly different ways. So one is the classic project way. So you get, you know, a deadline, we're going to deliver project X in 3 months or whatever, and you know, we've spent a lot of money on it, so you have to deliver. So there's that one. There's a variation on that, is which you deliver the project and it hasn't worked, and then you've got another bunch of stakeholders who are really stressed. So, you know, it's not just the project, you can carry on after the project. And then you've got the ones around the sort of commercial side of technology, where because technology is seen as a growth industry, and to succeed in that, your business needs to be growing. There's a whole bunch of commercial pressures and investment pressures on people to perform, so meet the sales target, and the sales target is aggressively increasing, the revenue targets are aggressively increasing, the margin is aggressively increasing. So this constant need to deliver more, deliver it faster, and do it with less. is a sort of theme that's in technology that is there year after year. So even if you had a good year last year, that doesn't matter. You've got to start over. It's a bit like, soccer management or something like that. You're only as good as your latest results. So I think those are the two. There's the project scenario, and then this kind of the nature of the industry, which is constantly changing and evolving, and the expectations are high commercially.
Yeah. And when it comes to, let's say, if you see someone burning out, or if you're experiencing burnout yourself, is there a very visible effect in someone's performance in tech? First thing that comes to mind is the likes of coding and deadlines and stuff.
Yeah.
And let's say when it comes to KPIs and performance reviews, are there
Yeah.
telltale signs?
In a way, it's harder. It's easier to conceal it from other people because of the natural remoteness. But often, in an office situation, everybody, if you're on a project, everybody's got activities anyway, so they're head down. If you're in a commercial office, people have got their stuff that they're doing. So, you could be sitting next to somebody for 2 hours and you never speak to each other than say, do you want a coffee? So you've got that sense of isolation still in a lot of office situations. But yeah, if people are physically manifesting their distress, you can see it in an office in a way you can't with remote working. The thing I'd say about remote working is, for the people who have a duty of care, remote working, I think, is sometimes a convenient excuse for saying, well, I didn't really see it because, they live 200 miles away. But I ran remote teams for, well, in some shape or form for 20 years, but sort of full time for about certainly the last 12 years, and different cultures. So people in the Netherlands, people in India, people in America. And if you take the time to build a relationship with someone remotely, which doesn't mean, oh, let's go on a call once a week and let's just go through, your action list and what we said, but actually take time to get to know them, which is an overhead on your time, but you create a deeper relationship. And actually, then you can tell just through the conversations, because the pattern of conversation varies week to week, and you can see when people are struggling or are having difficulty, and then you can reach out to them. And so you can do it remotely. I think it takes practice, and you need to be engaged. And I think certainly in the technology industry, because of the pace of it, sometimes if you've got duty of care responsibility, it's kind of hard to make the time to do that in a remote work situation when you've got all the other pressures on you that are causing you stress, and you're trying to find a balance in your own life. Then it can be tough then.
Say when it comes to especially tech companies, when they probably have office workers, but they also have a remote team.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that is there more difficulty in trying to foster a positive culture or growth culture to try and to break that burnout culture, to break that chain? Is it harder to implement that culture when you have people working remotely, or how would you approach fostering breaking that burnout culture?
So I think it is harder. It is harder. And the other thing to say about tech companies, though I imagine it's true well, it is true in other industries, but particularly in tech, you tend to have organizations are arranged functionally in terms of business functions. And so within those functions, people tend to have a similar expertise and speak their own language. When you pull a team together, whether that be a bid team for a commercial situation or a project team, you pull people out of these silos. So you have to create a culture for the team anyway to succeed, because it doesn't happen naturally. Everybody's left to their own devices will go to their natural comfort zone. So the way to create the conditions that avoid that burnout scenario is to play into that and recognize that you've got 6 individuals, each of whom have got skills and are valuable, and you bring them together and you create that team and you create that culture. And through that engagement, you can then move to a place which reduces the chance of an individual feeling left behind and burning out. But again, it's not everybody does that, right? That's not, I wouldn't say that's an out of the book training exercise that everybody in tech does. And again, back to your bias, if you're a very commercial person, then you probably don't understand people who are very techy. I mean, you work together, but they speak a totally different language. So your ability to relate to them is really quite tricky anyway, and them to you. So there are barriers because of people's knowledge and expertise that exacerbate the problem, but it can be overcome. But it takes effort, and it takes the orchestrator of the group to focus on it. I think for me, it's part of, I quite like the sporting analogies in this context, about the coach of a team bringing the team together and making sure the team is functioning and as the sum of greater than the sum of the parts, and the individuals are all in a good place. It's similar to that, but doing it electronically in a remote situation.
When it comes to burnout in tech, is there a high, let's say, staff turnover, or is there a high retention rate? When you see people burning out in tech, do people tend to stick with the same job, or are they, let's say, quick to move on, or to jump from job to job?
I think in my experience, there's not a general rule. I think it comes down to the personality and the skill set of the individual, and how those things come together to define how they define themselves, what their identity is. So for people who are, for example, technology specialists, and they love it with a passion, and that's their North Star, then if they're put in situations that are causing that burnout, they may move, or they will move to maybe a different company or a different role, but they'll still stay in that same space. And so in a technology situation, often the recognition is that they've got that safe space, move them towards that in a slightly different role. So there's a degree of flexibility in technology companies to accommodate that, because those skills are valuable, and you want to rehearse them. If you're a commercial person and your main skill is selling, then you too will be burned out and can be burned out. But because you sell, maybe your personality, your sort of more of maybe an extrovert personality, you may say to hell with this, I'm just going to cut and run. And though an individual in that scenario may just go before the company can intervene if they want to. So it varies by person. And again, as I've given those two examples, I can think of two opposite examples of the same classification, tech and commercial.
It was kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I automatically thought of the exact opposite as examples. That I'd always thought that someone in tech, they're especially, let's say, they're specialists, or they know their skill set, and they're more confident to go from job to job because they know that that their skill set is sought after in other companies. They'd be very quick to be like, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of this company. Just going to start afresh somewhere new. And I always feel that when people have that mindset or that mentality, that they're just bringing their burnout with them. They
Yeah.
haven't broken the cycle, and
Yeah.
they still have the same triggers, they still have the same stressors. All they're doing
Yes.
is bringing the first step, which is that enthusiasm, to the next company
Yes.
and restarting the cycle. And
Yes.
sometimes they burn out quicker in that new company, and they're
Yes.
wondering why.
Yes.
And then I suppose the same as you said with commercial and sales.
Yes.
It all, I suppose it does come down to the individual personality.
Yeah.
Some people are more ready to up and leave, but other people get set in their ways, and they kind of get used to being stuck on autopilot, and they get comfortable. And even though they feel they're burning out, or they feel less valued in a position, they're like, oh, but maybe I won't be valued in the next place. I won't be valued, and they just stick with it.
That's right. I think you're right. Absolutely. And the thing that came to my mind listening to that we haven't touched on is the experience curve and the maturity in your career, which you were touching on there. I think about where, so people, I think, earlier in their career are quicker to say, forget this, I'm going to go do something else. And then as you get older and further into your career, you may look at it in a slightly different way, and you have the experience to say, actually, I know that if I keep pursuing that, it's self-destructive, and therefore I will go this way. And it just means I'm not quite the person I thought I was 10 years ago, but I'm okay with that. And then people start that's those sorts of thought processes start to emerge, but only after you've had a certain amount of experience.
Yeah, because like even I've met some people and they were feeling they're going through extreme burnout. And I was trying to, let's say, help them through it. And I was like, look, maybe this position, you've outgrown this position, and maybe you'd be more sought after elsewhere. And they're like, oh no, I'm too old. I can't move on to another
Mm-hmm,
company. This is
mm-hmm,
I've been here for 20 years, and they're only in
mm-hmm.
their early 40s.
Yeah,
And it's they're
yeah,
like, you could take up a management position, you could take up a senior position in a similar company, and it might be more exciting. You have the experience. If anything, you could probably help grow a team.
yes,
And they were like, "Oh no, no, this is all I know,"
yes,
and they stay stuck in their ways, and you just see them constantly just like regressing,
yes,
and it's like you're not growing in your role, and you just see them regressing in that role, and it's almost heartbreaking. It's
yes,
like I see so much potential in you that you can't see yourself.
yes, yes. No, definitely that happens, and it's really distressing to see. And I think I think that fear of change is there, but and then it's trying to find, in my experience, it's trying to understand or get that person to understand, well, what is it that you're frightened of? Because you're not happy, because if you were happy, we wouldn't be having this conversation, but you don't want to change this bit of your life. So how do you reconcile these things? And I have had those conversations over time, and it was really interesting. One we talked about performance appraisals earlier, and I had a boss who gave me a trick which I used for a while, which was really powerful, which was when we set the 2 or 3 objectives that you have for the year, we're going to set a fourth objective, and it's an entirely personal objective for you, for your life. Forget work. What are you going to do in the next 12 months? And you ask that question, it's sort of nonplussed because you don't expect it in that context, and you think about it, and you go, and then of course you're into, well, why wouldn't you set one? Well, all right, I'll set one. And that was a really interesting trigger into, I found, into this other conversation with people who said, well, I couldn't possibly do this, or I couldn't do that. And then you say, okay, well, let's talk about what would your a personal goal be for the next 12 months. And then they start talking about it and thinking about it. And one guy I remember said, I want to play the violin. Well, why do you want to learn to play the violin again? I said, why do you want to do that? And he thought about it quite a while, and he said, because I want to be creative. And I said, that sounds fantastic. I said, what creativity do you not have in your life that you want that for? And he said, I don't find my work creative. He said, I never really thought about it that way before, but I just don't find it creative. I enjoy it, but I don't find it creative. And then we got into that conversation. So it's interesting to find those pathways that get people to think, but it's really hard, I think, for people to make that association themselves.
That's really interesting. I think the reason that resonated with me at the moment was because I was listening to a guy talking about bucket lists, and people always make their bucket list for when they retire, when they have time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about bucket lists, like everyone usually puts things like, "Oh, I want to travel, I want to see the world, but I won't be able to do it until I retire when I have lots of time in my hands." But your bucket list should be personal experiences that you can put into your life every year, every day.
Yeah,
And again, just like your man playing the violin, that was
yeah,
probably something on his bucket list that if you didn't, let's say, throw that question at him to play the violin now, he probably had it in the back of his mind and said, "Oh, I'd love to pick up the violin again, but I'll
yeah,
probably wait until I retire when I have more time and I'll pick it up then."
yeah, yeah, exactly. The other variation I found is the one where to your point, is the one where you talk to someone about They'll say something like, well, I don't want to be doing this in 5 years' time. And you say, okay, that's great. So when are you going to stop? And what do you want to do? You get into that, and they're like, well, no, I pushed that on for 5 years. But no, no, no. You said you don't want to do it in 5 years. So you're going to stop in four. Uh, you know, are you stop in two? You're going to stop in a year? You're going to stop in 6 months? To get people to just change their frame of reference, because otherwise they just, it's so easy. Oh, I do it. Everyone does it. You kick it down the road. The old saying "tomorrow never comes" is actually true. The older we all get, we become more aware of that. Hopefully, you know. Um,
Yeah, again, the whole kicking it down the road, especially looking 5 years in the future. Oh yeah, that's on the 5 year plan. That's on the 10 year plan, and it's like, why not now?
mhm.
Why not make a start on that now? It's like, why are you going to wait 10 years to travel?
Yeah,
Why aren't we putting a plan in place? You could make a 10 year plan. You might be able to achieve it in 10 months.
yeah, exactly. And I think for that, back to the context of burnout, I think that's so important to have that perspective, because I think, in my experience, that burnout thing starts to come into play when you're so focused on the immediate or the near or the imagined, and you can't look beyond. You don't lift your head up at the world around you. You're in this bubble that is partly you've created, partly has been imposed upon you, and not having a release valve for all the pressure that's inside there, and finding a clarity and a perspective that can cause a lot of problems, I think.
When it comes to burnout, I feel it always comes to alignment, the alignment of your core values and beliefs at the end of the day.
Yeah,
And a lot of people always put it out on the long finger, being like, oh, my goals or my values, I'll achieve them 5 years down the line. I'll stick with this for now because it's comfortable. I may not like it, but this is what I know.
yeah,
And they're like, but I'll stick with it for a couple of
yeah,
years. And when I'm comfortable,
yeah,
when I'm ready to move on, I'll do it. But I'll think about it in 5 years' time. I won't worry about it now,
yeah,
even though it's eating them every day.
yeah,
And they're constantly thinking about that 5 year plan or that 5 year goal every day that they go to work.
yeah,
And they probably don't see it, how it's affecting them and affecting their productivity, their progress, their relationships, their overall, let's say, not even just their career, but they probably take that same attitude home, that they spend the whole day probably dreaming about their 5 year goal at work, and they don't have that job satisfaction or fulfillment or that purpose anymore.
yeah,
And they bring that negativity home then, and it affects their personal lives.
yeah, and which is then a feedback loop into their professional life, and ultimately it's very easy for us to all think, life is unlimited and it's limitless, but it's not. Everything's finite, and if you I think that mindset, that not recognizing things are finite, and that therefore that your time and your energy is precious and how you spend it is precious, a lot of people lose track of that because of the pressures, and that as somebody once said to me, it's a bit like being in a fur-lined rut. You're kind of comfortable, you're stuck, you're not actually happy, but it's not so uncomfortable that you do something about it. And that's such a waste, I think. Such a shame, actually, because eventually it'll break. People will burn out, and it happens in horrible ways for people, and that's to be avoided as much as possible.
Your fur-lined rot, it kind of reminded me of that. People know that it's pain staying the same, but they won't take action until the pain of staying the same is less than the discomfort or the pain of taking action and making a change.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And it's waiting until it gets to that point.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And what I mean, I was very fortunate. I worked with a few people who had very we spent quite a bit of time on these sorts of topics, and certainly with my coaching, it's very much about exploring the difficulties somebody has, and helping them overcome them intellectually and emotionally to get their mindset to a point of clarity, and then helping them with a plan, an action plan of some kind, and then being with them as they execute that plan, so that, you know, that saying about you act your way to a new way of thinking is certainly something we talked about, where did it all come from for me. That was a realization I had, that if I was in a crisis situation or a burnout situation, my need to act to release the pressure was really strong. And I found that helps people if their business is not growing the way they want, their project is a disaster, their customers are really unhappy, their leadership team doesn't work, it's crushing them. Then for me, it's that mindset clarity, understanding those triggers and things, but then also actionable things coming out of that allow them just to take those steps down that road of change, and walk them down that road with them, so there's somebody there, so that they can say, yeah, okay, I'm not alone as I'm doing this, and then hopefully it leads to something where they can move on, and they've moved in a slightly different direction. And, you know, I like that Japanese philosophy. I think it's Kaizen, where you make a small change it's small changes, but and just a few gradually, and see what works, see what doesn't work. And I think that's going back to what you were saying. I think that's what that action, that fear of action, creates the inertia, and people can just be trapped, and then it's a pressure cooker.
Yeah, I love how you came back to Kaizen there, because I think that was my background, especially in quality management. It always comes back to Kaizen and
Yeah,
continuous improvement.
yeah,
And it also is kind of the behind the whole concept of give yourself some leeway. It's all about the smallest step, taking a step back, taking a deep breath, and thinking about what's the smallest step that I can take today to be better, to make myself better for tomorrow, to make
yes,
life easier on myself tomorrow. And
yes,
then what's the next step I can take once that first step becomes so easy that it's almost too silly to think that's my improvement for today. What's the next step that I can take on top of that? And it's those tiny little progressions.
yeah.
So I suppose in give yourself some leeway tradition and trying to make things as simple as possible so that it almost sounds silly. What would be your approach to someone in the tech industry recovering from burnout and putting their best foot forward? What would be the most simple step that you think they could take today?
Somebody recovering from burnout in the technology industry.
I suppose one place to start is maybe awareness.
Yes,
How would you help them to realize that they're actually burning out?
yes. I think the so yeah, if we've got someone who's actually burning out, it would be that supportive process of helping them acknowledge that they were unhappy, and acknowledge that the unhappiness and the stress is a function of the surroundings, and is relatively new. It's not their natural state, and then help them to try and unpick why they're reacting that way, and help them explore what's triggering this in them. And then, having done that, then start to explore about what small changes they could be making, either in their, and I'm thinking relationships with other people, looking at some of their triggers, the ones that are particularly um, strong, within their circle of control, things that they have agency over. So get them to recognize they have agency, try to help them understand that, and then identify some of those triggers, and then start making the plan would then be to deal with individual X in a slightly different way, to deal with this scenario in a slightly different way, and then rehearse it. Get them to rehearse. So they come up with their idea, they come up with a suggestion, and then we come back and rehearse it. Say, okay, well, we thought about that. That's a great idea. Let's just play that out as if if it's going to happen? And does it still stack up as an approach you feel comfortable with? And if it does, great, let's write it down. Because if we write it down, it's real, right? It's not just the words in the air. We've written it down. And this is the commitment. The commitment is you're going to go and do these things. I'm going to support you in the way that we've agreed, whether that be a phone call every day, you'll check in with me, maybe we talk in a week's time, maybe I provide you some material that will help you as you think about something, whatever it may be. Write it down, and then we run that as a plan of actions with regular check-ins that we've agreed. And the idea is then along the way, some of it will work, some of it won't work, but we create some momentum and we move things into a different place. And then I've done this lots of times. Sometimes, I mean, an example, there was a CEO completely at the end of in the burnout position. And we did this exercise, and the difference 6 weeks later was really powerful for this individual. But the individual only made a few changes, but we ran the plan, and they liked, because of their position, they liked that accountability, responsibility, and they liked owning it. It was their plan. It wasn't my plan. It was their plan. They liked the accountability, and they liked the support, and they liked the fact it was intimate and private. So all their problems were not shared with everybody. It wasn't on display. And that was 6 weeks. And that completely changed them and their ability to run their business. Other people, it might take longer, and it might be in a different context. So that would be how I'd approach it. If it was someone who was burning out, or if it was somebody who had burned out, actually, it would really come the same way. It'd be that understanding the mindset and then going from there.
I suppose another thing that just crossed my mind there is you experienced your burnout over 20 years ago when you had that realization in was it Norfolk, you said?
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced burnout since?
Yes. I think, I sort of alluded to that. And so I would say I did about 15 years ago, totally different context. But the same sort of process of it was commercial pressures that time. And so I had learned from the first thing. I changed, done different things. I'd moved on in my career. I had different experiences, more responsibility. And then again, what I was doing no longer worked for a bunch of factors that were to do with me and external factors and the way they collided and my ability to manage those. But it was a very similar process as described before. And what I found, actually, having done the first one and then the second, so the first one was in a project scenario, project and running a business. The second one was just commercial management of a bigger business, more responsibility, that I found in the years that followed. So I'm talking about 2011 now. In the years that followed, whenever I was much better at picking up the signs, because in technology by then I kind of covered all the bases, really, different basic fundamental scenarios where you could do it. So I was actually better, I noticed, at it didn't happen again, and I could manage those situations and help other people in a better way, actually, than I could before.
Yeah, I think the reason why I wanted to cover that was because it's kind of like when you burn out the first time, you hit that rock bottom and that realization, and it's more of a shock. But once you learn the tools and you have the tools in your toolbox, you have that awareness, you can see the early signs, and you can see yourself start to slip, and you're like, okay, I have to reach back into my toolbox and see what works now. It might have worked the first time, but it might not work now. So maybe I have to try something else.
That's
and
right.
It's because it might not affect you in the same way. It might have been your career that burnt you out the first time. It could be personal responsibilities. It could be your family. It could be extra commitments that you take on outside of work that's burning you out this time.
Yeah.
It could be a completely unplanned event that you couldn't have foreseen. And
Yes.
that extra stress and pressure on top of your workload is now burning you out. And
Exactly.
it's driving you to complete exhaustion. But it's kind of like sometimes it can overwhelm you and you're like, oh, I'm actually in the same state that I was 5 years ago. How did I let it get this far? And other times you feel yourself slowly down spiraling, but you're aware of it and you're like,
Mm,
okay, I can see myself getting out of control here. I need to set boundaries. I
mm.
need to put systems in place to stop it from getting worse. And
Yeah.
it's sometimes it's hard not to fall into burnout, but it's about, let's say, softening the curve
Yeah.
and kind of so that you can hit the ground running. You're like, okay, I know I'm burning out here, but I'm not going to completely burn out and be kind of debilitated for months
Yeah.
because of it and sink into depression or the likes. That you're preparing yourself. It's like, okay, this is the way my body's reacting,
Yeah.
and it's not I'm going to go with it, but it's like I'm prepared for I know how this works. I know how this cycle goes, and
Yeah.
I'm prepared to come out the other side
Yeah.
better again. But
Yeah.
you're kind of you can kind of mentally prepare yourself for that curve, that cycle.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I think, as you say, it's not that you go with it, it's that you, I'm trying to think of it's a bit sort of, you ride the wave a little bit. You know it's going to be bumpy. The fact is you're aware of it and you're watching for, you're trying to take action to address it, but you know that the action is, it's not putting a handbrake on a car. You're guiding and steering and slowing and maybe accelerating. It's going to be bumpy, but I think the thing is, with experience, is you learn that to watch the signs, and you learn to try the tools, and you also, over time, like after my second time, you learn to keep looking for tools, new tools, and you recognize that not everything's going to work, and it doesn't matter as long as you're addressing the problem in, rather than just letting it spiral. Then that those things, I think, help you a lot as you've gone through a burnout scenario or near burnout scenario once or twice.
Just examples from my own experience when I was first going through my first burnout recovery journey, and it was all trial and error, trying to figure out what
Yeah.
worked for me,
Yeah.
and things like yoga. Someone said like, "Oh, try yoga. Yoga cures everything." And I was
Yeah.
going to try yoga. I was like, did not work for me. Other
Yeah.
people were like running, and it's like, and at first running was good for clearing my mind, but I realized that it was a form of escapism, that I was running to not think of my thoughts, and
Yeah.
that it was just clouding what it was just it it wasn't helping me to recover from my burnout. Yes, I was getting the endorphins after the exercise, but I
Yeah.
realized that my push to go running was to not think. And I
Yeah.
found out that going for a long walk was more beneficial
Yeah.
because I could think clearly when I was walking. I could just take time to myself. I could walk for hours on end
Yeah.
and I could just process my thoughts.
Yeah.
So I found that walking worked for me better.
Yeah.
What was other things I was looking into? Like I was looking into hypnotherapy and the likes. I was like, oh, can I do hypnotherapy? I was like, do I want to go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah.
And I was looking at all these different rabbit holes and different pathways. Yes, they're tools that may be helpful in the future in some element. I haven't knocked the likes of yoga off the list because I'm like, okay, maybe it didn't help me now, but if I get a better understanding in the future,
Yeah.
maybe there's meditations, maybe there's breath
Yeah.
work in yoga that I haven't found yet, and they may work in the future. In terms of time commitment, in terms of where my mindset is at, what kind of mentality I have around maybe my understanding and the beliefs behind yoga as well. So I haven't knocked it off the list. It's just put back in a safe corner in the toolbox
Yeah.
for maybe I might need it in the future.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is important understanding that everyone's approach to recovery can be different in ways. and it's
Agreed.
about trying out trial and error to some extent. I think, especially when it comes to you as a coach, you're providing guidance.
That's
Some
right.
people, they try to go on their burnout recovery journey and they don't know where to start,
Yeah.
and then they find themselves going down one rabbit hole and it's not working for them.
Yeah.
And next thing, they find that they're overwhelmed by the pressures of their life, of their work, their family, and any other personal commitments they have.
And their
And it's about giving them that.
expectation, sorry,
Exactly.
because say their
Yeah.
expectation that this should be getting better and it's not. They're
Yes.
trying these things and it's not getting better. And it's like the walls are just closed in a little bit more. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's we're all different, and the pathway for each person, I think, is different. You're right. It's finding something that works for the individual, and necessarily a degree of trial and error. And as you say, the coach is guiding, and I think the coach is helping the individual explore and maybe rehearse what these things would actually be like. So, because I had something similar to you, somebody had recommended running, and I did try, and I thought, well, I ought to get a bit fitter maybe. And then I thought about it. I thought, there's no way I want to go. At the end of the day, the last thing I want to do is put on a pair of shoes and go out for a run for 2 hours in the rain. But every day I would be prepared to go for a walk because I have to walk to the station. So maybe I'll use that time as my time. And so it's all personal, it's all different. But you keep looking, as you say, you keep looking, don't you?
Yes, 100%. So, Bob, if anyone was looking to maybe hear more about you and your coaching, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So the best way would be LinkedIn, or my website. I can never remember the name of the website, which is embarrassing. But LinkedIn is Bob Cotton, so that's quite easy to find.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, could you take a moment to leave a 5-star rating on Spotify? Because it really helps to improve the rating of the show, so that it's more easily found by others who might enjoy the show just as much as you. And maybe take a moment to share with family, friends, or a loved one. Because what better way to help break the stigma around mental health than to have that conversation with those closest to us? As always, reach out to me at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com, on social media, eugene.leeway, or shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie, because even though Give Yourself Some Leeway is like an outlet for me, I also want to give the highest value to you, my listeners. So I really depend on your feedback. Let me know what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to hear more about. So until I hear from you, take care of yourself. Maybe have a glass of water, crack a smile, and think of a way to prioritize your own self-care. So until next time, take care.